The grand ballroom of the Riverside Hotel sparkled under hundreds of crystal chandeliers, their light dancing across the polished marble floors and reflecting off the golden walls. Tonight was the annual charity gala for the Children's Heart Foundation, an event that brought together the city's most influential families, business leaders, and philanthropists. The air buzzed with excitement as guests in elegant evening were mingled, their conversations mixing with the soft melody of a string quartet positioned near the ornate stage. Kate Morrison stood near the entrance, smoothing down her midnight blue silk gown as she surveyed the magnificent scene before her. At 28, she had attended many such events as part of her work with various charitable organizations, but tonight felt different. There was an electricity in the air that made her heart race, though she couldn't quite put her finger on why. Perhaps it was because this particular charity held such personal significance for her, or maybe it was the knowledge that tonight's fundraising efforts could literally save lives. As the development coordinator for the foundation, Kate had spent months planning this evening down to the smallest detail. She had coordinated with caterers, negotiated with vendors, and personally reached out to potential donors. The weight of responsibility sat heavily on her shoulders, but it was a burden she carried gladly. Her younger brother had been born with a congenital heart defect, and while he had been fortunate enough to receive the surgery he needed, Kate knew that many families weren't as lucky. This gala represented hope for countless children who needed life-saving procedures. The evening had begun perfectly. Guests had arrived promptly at 7, many stopping to admire the elaborate ice sculptures that decorated the entrance hall. The cocktail hour had been a resounding success, with the silent auction items generating significant interest. Kate had watched with satisfaction as bidding wars erupted over vacation packages, artwork, and exclusive dining experiences. The energy in the room was palpable, and early estimates suggested they might exceed their fundraising goal by a substantial margin. William Chun had arrived fashionably late, as was his custom at such events. At 32, he was already making waves in the architectural world, his innovative designs earning him recognition and respect among his peers. Tonight, he wore a perfectly tailored black tuxedo that emphasized his tall, athletic frame. His dark hair was styled impeccably, and his confident stride commanded attention as he made his way through the crowd. William's presence at the gala wasn't entirely altruistic, though his intentions were good. His architecture firm had recently completed a pro bono project for the foundation, designing a new wing for the children's cardiac unit at the local hospital. The project had been close to his heart, particularly after he had spent time with some of the young patients during the planning phase. Their courage and resilience in the face of such serious medical challenges had left a profound impact on him. As the evening progressed, William found himself drawn into conversations with potential clients and colleagues. The networking aspect of such events was crucial for his business, but tonight he found it difficult to focus on the usual small talk about upcoming projects and market trends. His attention kept wandering to the elegant woman in the blue gown who seemed to be everywhere at once, ensuring that every aspect of the evening ran smoothly. Kate had noticed William's arrival, though she tried to appear nonchalant about it. She had heard about his work on the hospital project and had been impressed by both his talent and his generosity. During their brief email exchanges regarding the project, she had found his communication style to be both professional and warmly human. Seeing him in person for the first time, she was struck by how his photographs hadn't quite captured the intensity of his dark eyes or the easy confidence with which he carried himself. The first course of dinner was served at 8:30, and guests began making their way to their assigned tables. Kate had strategically seated herself at a table near the back of the room, close enough to the kitchen and audiovisual equipment to handle any last-minute issues that might arise. She had learned from experience that Murphy's Law seemed to apply especially strongly to charity events, and she wanted to be positioned to respond quickly to any problems. William found himself seated at a table near the front, surrounded by major donors and board members. The conversation flowed easily, touching on everything from the foundation's recent accomplishments to broader discussions about healthcare accessibility. He found himself genuinely engaged with his table mates, particularly Mrs. Elizabeth Hartford, an elderly philanthropist whose sharp wit and passionate advocacy for children's causes reminded him of his own grandmother. As the salad course was cleared and the main course served, the foundation's president, Dr. Michael Torres, took the stage to address the gathered crowd. His speech was both moving and informative, detailing the specific ways that the evening's fundraising efforts would be utilized. He spoke about Maria, a 7-year-old who had recently undergone successful heart surgery thanks to the foundation's support, and about James, a teenager who was currently on the waiting list for a heart transplant. Kate listened from her position at the back of the room, feeling a familiar tightness in her chest as Dr. Torres spoke. These weren't just statistics or fundraising targets to her. They represented real children with real families who were depending on their efforts. She thought about her own brother's surgery years ago, remembering the fear and uncertainty her family had experienced during that difficult time. The stress of the evening was beginning to take its toll on Kate, though she tried not to let it show. She had been working 18-hour days for the past 2 weeks, surviving on coffee and determination. The previous night, she had barely slept, lying awake going over last-minute details and worrying about potential problems. Her assistant had called in sick that morning, leaving Kate to handle several additional responsibilities on her own. Despite her exhaustion, Kate maintained her professional composure, moving gracefully between tables during the dinner service to check on guests and ensure that everything was proceeding according to plan. She had a brief conversation with the head caterer about the timing for dessert service, coordinated with the audiovisual team about the upcoming presentation, and fielded questions from board members about various aspects of the evening's program. William noticed Kate's constant movement and couldn't help but admire her dedication. It was clear that she was the driving force behind the evening's success, yet she managed to handle her responsibilities with a grace that made it all look effortless. He found himself watching her interactions with guests, noting how she seemed to remember personal details about each person she encountered and how her genuine smile lit up her entire face. As dessert was served, the lights dimmed slightly for the evening's main presentation. A large screen descended from the ceiling, and a video began playing that featured interviews with families who had benefited from the foundation's work. The production quality was excellent, with professional cinematography and editing that brought the stories to life in a powerful way. Kate had worked closely with the video production team to ensure that the presentation would be both informative and emotionally compelling. The video featured the family of a 5-year-old named Sophie, whose parents spoke tearfully about their daughter's successful surgery and recovery. There were scenes of Sophie playing in a playground, laughing with her siblings, and attending her first day of kindergarten. The contrast between the joyful present-day footage and the clinical hospital scenes from earlier in her treatment was stark and moving. William felt his throat tighten as he watched the presentation. The work that the foundation was doing was clearly making a profound difference in these families' lives, and he felt proud to have contributed to their efforts through his architectural work. He glanced around the room and saw that many other guests were similarly affected, with several people reaching for their handkerchiefs or discreetly wiping away tears. Kate watched the presentation from her position near the back wall, feeling a mixture of pride and emotion. She had been involved in Sophie's case from the beginning, working closely with the family to coordinate their treatment and provide emotional support during the difficult months leading up to the surgery. Seeing Sophie's transformation from a frail, frightened child to the vibrant, healthy little girl on the screen filled Kate with a sense of purpose and validation for all the long hours and hard work she had invested in her role. The presentation concluded with a call to action, encouraging guests to consider making additional contributions to help the foundation reach even more children in need. The response was immediate and generous, with several people approaching the donation stations that had been set up around the perimeter of the room. Kate felt a surge of relief and gratitude as she watched the generous response from the assembled guests. Dr. Torres returned to the stage to thank the guests for their support and to recognize some of the evening's key sponsors and volunteers. When he called Kate to the stage to acknowledge her role in organizing the event, she felt a moment of panic. Public speaking had never been her strong suit, and she had hoped to avoid being singled out during the evening's program. Reluctantly, Kate made her way to the front of the room, her heart pounding as hundreds of eyes turned to focus on her. The applause was warm and genuine, but she felt suddenly dizzy as she climbed the steps to the stage. The bright light seemed unusually harsh, and she blinked several times, trying to clear her vision. William watched with interest as Kate approached the microphone. He had been hoping for an opportunity to hear her speak, curious about the woman who had orchestrated such a flawless event. As she began to address the crowd, he was impressed by the warmth and sincerity in her voice, despite what appeared to be some nervousness about being in the spotlight. Kate's brief speech focused on thanking the guests for their generosity and emphasizing the real-world impact of their contributions. She spoke about the foundation's mission and the importance of community support in making their work possible. Her words were heartfelt and genuine, and the audience responded with enthusiastic applause. As Kate concluded her remarks and prepared to leave the stage, she felt a strange sensation wash over her. The room seemed to tilt slightly, and she gripped the podium for support. The exhaustion and stress of the past weeks were finally catching up with her, but she was determined to maintain her composure until the evening was complete. The remainder of the dinner service proceeded smoothly, with guests lingering over coffee and dessert while the string quartet resumed their performance. Kate continued to circulate through the room, but William noticed that her movements seemed less fluid than before, and there were moments when she appeared to pause and steady herself. As the evening drew toward its close, the foundation's board chair announced the preliminary fundraising totals for the evening. The amount was impressive, exceeding their target goal by nearly 30%. The announcement was met with thunderous applause and cheers from the delighted guests, many of whom had contributed generously to achieve this remarkable result. Kate felt a wave of relief wash over her as the successful fundraising total was announced. All of her hard work and planning had paid off, and the foundation would be able to help many more children as a result of this evening's success. However, the emotional and physical toll of the past weeks was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore, and she found herself looking forward to the moment when she could finally go home and rest. The evening's festivities continued as guests began to transition from the formal dinner portion to the more relaxed reception that would follow. The string quartet had been replaced by a small jazz ensemble, and several couples had begun dancing on the designated area near the front of the ballroom. The atmosphere remained elegant, but had taken on a more celebratory tone following the announcement of the successful fundraising results. Kate moved through the crowd with practiced efficiency, but those who knew her well might have noticed that her usual boundless energy seemed somewhat diminished. She paused frequently to speak with departing guests, thanking them for their attendance and their generous support of the foundation. Each conversation required her to summon enthusiasm and warmth, drawing from reserves that were becoming increasingly depleted. The hotel staff had begun the process of clearing the dinner tables and rearranging the space for the reception phase of the evening. Kate coordinated with the catering manager to ensure that the transition proceeded smoothly, discussing the timing for the coffee service and the arrangement of additional seating areas. Her attention to detail remained sharp, but William noticed from across the room that she seemed to be moving more slowly than she had earlier in the evening. William had been engaged in conversation with Dr. Torres about potential future collaborations between his firm and the foundation. They discussed the possibility of renovating the foundation's administrative offices, a project that would require careful planning to maintain operations while construction was underway. William found the prospect intriguing, both from a professional standpoint and because of his growing respect for the organization's mission. As their conversation continued, William's attention was periodically drawn to Kate's movements around the room. He admired her dedication to ensuring that every guest felt appreciated and that every detail of the evening continued to run smoothly. However, his trained eye for observation had begun to notice subtle signs that all might not be well. Her smile, while still warm and genuine, seemed to require more effort than it had earlier, and there were moments when she appeared to pause mid-step, as if gathering herself before continuing. The reception area had been beautifully arranged with comfortable seating groups and small cocktail tables. Soft lighting created an intimate atmosphere, and the jazz ensemble provided an elegant soundtrack for the evening's conclusion. Many guests had moved to this area, drinks in hand, continuing their conversations about the evening's presentations and their own philanthropic interests. Kate made her way to the reception area to ensure that everything was proceeding according to plan. She spoke briefly with the bar manager about maintaining adequate staffing for the remainder of the evening and checked with the musicians about their remaining performance time. Each task was handled with her characteristic thoroughness, but the effort required to maintain her professional composure was becoming increasingly challenging. Mrs. Hartford approached Kate near the reception area, wanting to express her appreciation for the evening's program. At 82, Mrs. Hartford had attended countless charity events over the years, and she had developed a keen eye for recognizing genuine passion and commitment. She had been impressed not only by the evening's flawless execution, but also by Kate's obvious dedication to the foundation's cause. The two women chatted about the evening's success and about some of the families featured in the video presentation. Mrs. Hartford shared stories from her own decades of philanthropic work, offering perspectives on effective fundraising strategies and the importance of building long-term relationships with donors. Kate found the conversation both informative and inspiring, though she had to concentrate harder than usual to follow the older woman's rapid-fire observations and suggestions. William had concluded his conversation with Dr. Torres and was making his way through the reception area when he noticed Kate's conversation with Mrs. Hartford. He had met the elderly philanthropist at several previous events and had always enjoyed her sharp wit and passionate advocacy. Seeing the two women together, he was struck by what appeared to be a natural mentorship dynamic developing between them. As their conversation continued, Mrs. Hartford began sharing her thoughts about the importance of self-care for those working in the nonprofit sector. She had observed over the years that many dedicated individuals burn themselves out by failing to maintain proper work-life balance. Her comments were gentle but pointed, and Kate found herself wondering if her exhaustion was more obvious than she had realized. The evening's program was beginning to wind down, with some guests starting to make their departures. The Foundation's board members began circulating through the reception area, personally thanking key donors and sponsors for their support. The mood remained celebratory, with many conversations focusing on the impressive fundraising results and the positive impact that the evening's success would have on the Foundation's ability to help children in need. Kate excused herself from her conversation with Mrs. Hartford to coordinate with the hotel staff about the evening's conclusion. There were numerous logistical details to address, including the breakdown of the audiovisual equipment, the collection of silent auction items by winning bidders, and the coordination of transportation for guests who might need assistance. Each task required her attention, but she found herself having to make notes to remember items that would normally be automatic. The fatigue that Kate had been fighting all evening was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the dinner service and presentations was beginning to wear off, leaving behind the accumulated exhaustion of weeks of preparation and the emotional intensity of the evening's program. She had eaten very little during dinner, too focused on ensuring that everything ran smoothly to pay attention to her own needs. William found himself positioning closer to where Kate was working, drawn by a growing sense of concern for her well-being. His architectural training had taught him to notice structural details and potential problems before they became critical, and he was beginning to apply those same observational skills to Kate's increasingly obvious fatigue. He considered approaching her directly, but was uncertain whether such attention would be welcome from someone she barely knew. The jazz ensemble announced their final set of the evening, and the remaining guests gathered closer to the performance area. The music was sophisticated and mellow, providing a perfect backdrop for the evening's conclusion. Several couples took advantage of the opportunity to dance, swaying gently to the romantic melodies. The atmosphere was warm and intimate, a fitting end to what had been a tremendously successful event. Kate stood near the edge of the reception area, observing the scene with a mixture of satisfaction and relief. The evening had exceeded all of her expectations, both in terms of fundraising results and overall guest experience. The positive feedback she had received throughout the evening confirmed that her months of planning and preparation had paid off in a meaningful way. However, the physical and emotional toll of the experience was beginning to manifest in ways that were becoming increasingly difficult to conceal. As she watched the dancing couples and listened to the smooth jazz melodies, Kate allowed herself a rare moment of relaxation. The major responsibilities of the evening had been completed successfully, and the remaining tasks were largely administrative. For the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of accomplishment that wasn't immediately overshadowed by anxiety about the next item on her endless to-do list. William observed Kate's momentary pause and noticed how the tension in her shoulders seemed to ease slightly as she watched the dancing guests. The soft lighting caught the highlights in her hair, and, for a moment, she looked less like the driven professional who had orchestrated the evening's success, and more like the young woman she was underneath all the responsibility and pressure. The Foundation's president, Dr. Torres, approached Kate with a broad smile, wanting to personally thank her for her extraordinary efforts in making the evening such a resounding success. His praise was effusive and well-deserved, focusing not only on the logistical excellence of the event, but also on the way Kate had managed to infuse every aspect of the evening with genuine warmth and meaning. During their conversation, Dr. Torres mentioned that several board members had specifically commented on Kate's professionalism and dedication. He suggested that her role with the foundation might be expanded in the coming months, potentially including oversight of additional fundraising events and increased involvement in donor relations. While the recognition was gratifying, Kate found herself feeling somewhat overwhelmed by the prospect of additional responsibilities. As Dr. Torres continued to outline potential future projects and initiatives, Kate felt a familiar tightness in her chest that she had been experiencing intermittently throughout the evening. She attributed it to the stress and excitement of the event, but the sensation seemed to be intensifying rather than diminishing as the evening progressed. She took several deep breaths, trying to calm her racing heart and regain her equilibrium. William had been listening to the conversation between Kate and Dr. Torres from a nearby position, and he noticed a subtle change in Kate's demeanor. Her responses to Dr. Torres's enthusiastic planning seemed slightly delayed, and she appeared to be gripping the back of a nearby chair for support. His concern deepened, and he began moving closer to their position, though he remained uncertain about how to appropriately express his worries. The evening's final major milestone arrived as the auction results were tallied and announced. The silent auction had performed exceptionally well, with several items generating competitive bidding that drove prices well above their estimated values. The combined total from the dinner donations, auction proceeds, and additional pledges represented one of the most successful fundraising events in the foundation's history. Kate listened to the final auction results with genuine excitement, despite her growing physical discomfort. The success of the evening meant that the foundation would be able to help significantly more children in the coming year, potentially funding dozens of additional surgeries and treatment programs. The knowledge that her efforts had contributed to such meaningful results provided a deep sense of satisfaction that momentarily overshadowed her exhaustion. As the final guests began to make their departures, Kate started the process of coordinating the evening's conclusion. She needed to ensure that all auction items were properly distributed to their winning bidders, that any remaining logistical details were addressed with the hotel staff, and that the foundation's materials and equipment were properly packed and secured. The list of remaining tasks was manageable, but each item seemed to require more effort than it should have. The hotel staff began the process of breaking down the event setup, working efficiently to restore the ballroom to its original configuration. Kate supervised this process, ensuring that nothing was damaged or misplaced during the transition. Her perfectionist tendencies made it difficult for her to delegate these final responsibilities, even though several board members had offered to handle the remaining details. William found an opportunity to approach Dr. Torres privately and subtly expressed his concern about Kate's apparent fatigue. He was careful to frame his observations as general concern rather than specific medical worry, but he suggested that perhaps Kate might benefit from some assistance with the evening's remaining tasks. Dr. Torres listened thoughtfully and agreed that Kate had been working exceptionally hard in the lead-up to the event. The conversation between William and Dr. Torres led to an offer for William to assist with some of the final coordination tasks. While he had no specific experience with event management, his organizational skills and attention to detail made him well-suited to help with the remaining logistical items. Kate initially resisted the offer of assistance, insisting that she could handle the remaining responsibilities herself, but eventually agreed to accept help with some of the more routine tasks. Working alongside William during the evening's conclusion, Kate found his presence both helpful and somewhat unsettling. His competence in handling unfamiliar tasks was impressive, and his quiet efficiency reminded her that she didn't always have to shoulder every responsibility alone. However, she was also acutely aware of her own diminished capacity and worried that her fatigue might be more obvious than she intended. As the last of the major tasks were completed, Kate felt a profound sense of relief wash over her. The evening had been an unqualified success, exceeding all expectations and providing the foundation with resources that would make a real difference in children's lives. However, the emotional and physical toll of the experience was beginning to manifest in ways that were becoming increasingly difficult to manage through sheer determination alone. The ballroom had transformed significantly over the past hour as the hotel staff methodically dismantled the evening's elaborate setup. Tables were being cleared and folded, chairs stacked and wheeled away, and the sophisticated lighting arrangement was being carefully disassembled by the technical crew. The space that had been so alive with conversation, music, and celebration now echoed with the efficient sounds of professional cleanup crews at work. Kate stood near what had been the registration table, supervising the packing of the foundation's materials and ensuring that important documents and leftover promotional items were properly organized for transport back to the office. Her movements had become noticeably more deliberate, each action requiring conscious effort rather than flowing from the natural energy that had characterized her work throughout the earlier part of the evening. William continued to assist with various tasks, finding himself impressed by Kate's attention to detail even in these final stages of the event. She had a comprehensive checklist that covered everything from confirming auction item pickups to ensuring that the hotel staff had all necessary contact information for any follow-up questions. Her thoroughness was admirable, but he couldn't help noticing that she seemed to be checking items off her list more slowly than the tasks themselves required. The auction items were being distributed to their successful bidders, a process that required careful coordination between Kate, the hotel staff, and the guests themselves. Each item had to be matched with proper documentation, and several pieces required special handling due to their fragile nature or significant value. Kate personally oversaw each handoff, ensuring that winners were satisfied with their purchases and that proper receipts were provided for tax purposes. Mrs. Hartford had won several auction items, including a weekend getaway package and an original painting by a local artist. As she prepared to leave for the evening, she sought out Kate to express her appreciation once more for the exceptional event. The elderly woman's sharp eyes immediately noticed Kate's pallor and the slight tremor in her hands as she organized the auction paperwork. The conversation with Mrs. Hartford was warm but brief, as the older woman was clearly ready to conclude her evening and return home. However, before departing, she quietly suggested that Kate should consider taking some time off in the coming days to recover from what had obviously been an enormously demanding period. Her concern was gentle but unmistakable, delivered with the kind of maternal authority that came from decades of experience. Kate accepted Mrs. Hartford's advice graciously, though privately she knew that taking time off immediately following such a major event was impractical. There would be thank you letters to write, follow-up calls to make, and detailed reports to prepare for the Foundation's board of directors. The success of the evening would generate additional work rather than providing an opportunity for rest. As the last of the auction items were distributed and the final guests made their departures, Kate felt a complex mixture of emotions washing over her. The overwhelming relief of completing such a significant project successfully was tempered by the sudden absence of the adrenaline and external pressure that had been sustaining her for weeks. With the immediate demands of the evening concluded, her body seemed to be demanding the rest and recovery that she had been denying it. William had been helping to pack the remaining foundation materials into boxes and portable containers, working alongside Kate in companionable efficiency. He noticed that her contributions to their shared tasks were becoming increasingly minimal, with longer pauses between actions and a noticeable decrease in her usual precise coordination. His concern for her well-being was growing, though he remained uncertain about how to appropriately express it. The hotel's event coordinator approached Kate to conduct a final walkthrough of the ballroom and adjoining spaces, ensuring that all foundation materials had been retrieved and that there were no outstanding issues requiring attention. This process was routine for major events, but it required Kate to physically move through multiple rooms and maintain focus on numerous details simultaneously. During the walkthrough, Kate found herself having to concentrate harder than usual to follow the coordinator's questions and observations. The hotel professional was thorough and efficient, covering everything from lost and found items to final billing details, but Kate felt as though she was listening through a fog. She managed to respond appropriately to each inquiry, but the effort required was far greater than normal. William accompanied them during the walkthrough, ostensibly to help carry any remaining items, but primarily because he was reluctant to leave Kate alone in her current condition. His presence provided a subtle safety net, allowing him to assist with responses when Kate seemed to hesitate and ensuring that no important details were overlooked due to her obvious fatigue. The final stop on their walkthrough was the Foundation's temporary storage area, where boxes of promotional materials and leftover supplies had been consolidated for pickup the following day. Kate needed to verify that all items were properly labeled and that the hotel staff had correct contact information for coordination of the retrieval. This final administrative task seemed almost insurmountable to her in her current state. As Kate bent down to check the labels on several boxes, she felt a sudden rush of dizziness that forced her to grab onto a nearby wall for support. The sensation passed quickly, but not before both William and the hotel coordinator noticed her momentary distress. She quickly attributed the incident to the combination of her high heels and the long day, but her explanation didn't entirely mask the concern that her symptoms were generating. William stepped forward to handle the remaining box verification, suggesting that Kate might want to sit down for a few minutes while he completed the final checklist items. His offer was made casually, as though it were simply a matter of efficiency rather than concern for her well-being, but Kate was grateful for the intervention nonetheless. She accepted his assistance while trying to maintain the appearance that her need for help was temporary and minor. The hotel coordinator concluded the walkthrough with assurances that everything was in order and that with the formal conclusion of the evening's responsibilities, Kate found herself facing the prospect of actually leaving the hotel and making her way home. This transition, which should have been simple and routine, suddenly seemed dauntingly complex. She needed to retrieve her car from the hotel's parking garage, navigate evening traffic, and somehow summon the energy to drive safely to her apartment across town. William had anticipated this concern and quietly offered to ensure that Kate made it safely to her vehicle. His suggestion was presented as a simple courtesy, the kind of gesture that any gentleman might make at the conclusion of a formal event. But Kate sensed the deeper concern behind his offer. She was torn between her desire to maintain her independence and her growing awareness that she might actually need assistance. The elevator ride down to the parking garage was conducted in relative silence, with Kate leaning against the wall for support while William carried her small evening bag and a folder of important documents from the evening. The confined space and downward motion seemed to intensify her dizziness, and she found herself closing her eyes to combat the unsettling sensation. When the elevator doors opened onto the parking garage, Kate felt a momentary wave of disorientation as she tried to remember where she had parked her car earlier that evening. The underground space was dimly lit and filled with shadows, making it difficult to distinguish between similar-looking vehicles. What should have been a simple navigation task became unexpectedly challenging in her current state. William offered his arm for support as they walked through the parking garage, a gesture that Kate accepted with gratitude despite her reluctance to acknowledge her need for assistance. His steady presence and calm demeanor provided a sense of security that she hadn't realized she was craving. The sound of their footsteps echoed in the concrete space, creating an intimate atmosphere despite the utilitarian surroundings. When they reached Kate's car, a practical sedan that showed signs of heavy daily use, William gently suggested that she might want to consider alternative transportation for her journey home. His concern was evident despite his efforts to present the suggestion casually, and Kate found herself seriously considering the option despite her usual preference for independence. The keys felt unusually heavy in Kate's hand as she contemplated the drive home. The route was familiar and typically took about 20 minutes in evening traffic, but the prospect of maintaining concentration and quick reflexes for that duration seemed overwhelming. She stood beside her car, key in hand, trying to summon the energy and focus that safe driving would require. William waited patiently beside her, offering no pressure but making his continued presence available for whatever assistance she might need. His quiet support was different from the typical masculine tendency to immediately take charge of problematic situations, instead providing space for Kate to make her own decisions while ensuring that help was available if requested. After a few moments of consideration, Kate reluctantly acknowledged that driving in her current condition might not be the safest option. The admission was difficult for someone accustomed to handling every situation independently, but her commitment to safety overrode her pride. She looked up at William with an expression that mixed gratitude with embarrassment, unsure how to gracefully accept the help she clearly needed. William responded to her unspoken need with characteristic tact, suggesting that he would be happy to drive her home and arrange for her car to be picked up the following day. His offer was presented as a simple solution to a practical problem rather than as rescue of a damsel in distress, allowing Kate to accept his assistance while maintaining her dignity. The decision made, they walked together toward William's car, a sleek sedan that reflected his professional success and attention to quality. Kate found herself leaning more heavily on his arm as they moved through the parking garage, her body finally beginning to acknowledge the exhaustion that her willpower had been masking throughout the evening. As William helped her into the passenger seat of his car, Kate felt a complex mix of relief and vulnerability. The evening's success had been everything she had hoped for and more, but the personal cost was becoming increasingly apparent. She settled back into the comfortable seat, finally, allowing herself to relax for the first time in hours. The car's interior was immaculate and sophisticated, with soft leather seats and subtle technological features that spoke to William's appreciation for both comfort and functionality. As he adjusted the seat and climate controls to ensure her comfort, Kate found herself observing his careful attention to detail and his genuine concern for her well-being. William started the car and began the careful navigation out of the underground parking garage, driving with deliberate caution to minimize any jarring movements that might worsen Kate's condition. The smooth motion of the well-maintained vehicle was soothing, and Kate found herself beginning to truly relax as they emerged into the relative quiet of the city's evening traffic. As they drove through the city streets, Kate provided directions to her apartment while fighting the increasingly strong urge to simply close her eyes and rest. The familiar landmarks passed by the windows, but everything seemed slightly unreal, as though she were observing the journey from a great distance. William's calm presence and competent driving provided a sense of security that allowed her to finally acknowledge just how exhausted she truly was. The drive through the city's evening streets provided Kate with her first opportunity in weeks to simply be a passenger, free from the responsibility of making decisions or managing details. The gentle hum of William's car engine and the smooth progression through familiar neighborhoods created a cocoon of calm that she hadn't experienced since the intensive planning for the gala had begun. However, this newfound relaxation also allowed her body to finally acknowledge the full extent of its exhaustion. William drove with careful attention to Kate's comfort, avoiding sudden stops or sharp turns that might worsen her condition. He had noticed that she was becoming increasingly pale, and her breathing seemed somewhat shallow and irregular. His concern was growing, though he tried to maintain a calm demeanor to avoid adding anxiety to her obvious physical distress. The architecture training that had taught him to notice structural problems before they became critical was now alerting him to warning signs in Kate's deteriorating condition. As they navigated through the city center, Kate found herself struggling to maintain focus on providing directions to her apartment. Streets that she had traveled countless times suddenly seemed unfamiliar, and she had to concentrate hard to remember the correct turns and landmarks. The effort required for this simple task was both alarming and embarrassing, as she prided herself on her organizational abilities and attention to detail. The evening air coming through the slightly open windows was cool and refreshing, providing some relief from the stuffiness she had been feeling throughout the latter part of the gala. Kate leaned back against the leather headrest and tried to focus on breathing deeply and steadily, hoping to regain some equilibrium before they reached her destination. The city lights created patterns of illumination across the car's interior, adding to the dreamlike quality of the journey. William glanced occasionally at his passenger, noting that her eyes were closed and that she seemed to be concentrating on controlling her breathing. His medical knowledge was limited, but he recognized signs of severe exhaustion and possible dehydration. He began mentally reviewing the location of nearby hospitals, though he hoped that such drastic measures wouldn't be necessary. The conversation during the drive was minimal, with Kate conserving her energy for essential communications about navigation, while William focused on smooth, safe driving. When she did speak, her voice seemed weaker than it had been earlier in the evening, confirming his growing concerns about her well-being. He found himself driving more slowly than usual, both to extend their time together and to avoid any sudden movements that might worsen her condition. As they approached Kate's neighborhood, she roused herself to provide more detailed directions to her apartment building. The complex was a modest but well-maintained development that reflected her practical approach to housing choices. William was impressed by the mature landscaping and thoughtful architectural details, noting that Kate had chosen her residence with the same attention to quality and functionality that she brought to her professional work. The apartment building's parking area was well-lit and secure, with designated visitor spaces near the main entrance. William parked as close as possible to the building's front door, wanting to minimize the distance Kate would need to walk in her current condition. As he turned off the engine, the sudden silence seemed to emphasize the gravity of her situation and the significance of this moment in their developing relationship. Kate sat quietly for a moment, gathering her strength for the transition from the car to her apartment. The simple act of opening the car door and standing up seemed to require careful planning and considerable effort. She was grateful for William's patient presence, which allowed her to move at her own pace, without feeling rushed or pressured. William came around to help her out of the car, offering his arm for support as she stood on legs that felt unsteady and unreliable. The short walk to the building entrance required careful navigation, with Kate leaning heavily on his strong, steady presence. Each step felt deliberate and effortful, a stark contrast to her usual confident stride. The building's lobby was elegantly appointed but not ostentatious, reflecting the professional demographic that the complex primarily served. A comfortable seating area near the elevators provided a brief resting spot, which Kate gratefully utilized while William investigated the building's directory and elevator system. His practical approach to problem-solving was evident as he efficiently determined the best route to her apartment. The elevator ride to the third floor was conducted in companionable silence, with Kate leaning against the wall for support while William held her purse and the folder of documents from the evening. The enclosed space and upward motion seemed to intensify her dizziness, and she found herself gripping the handrail to maintain her balance. When they reached her floor, Kate directed William to her apartment at the end of the hallway. The corridor was carpeted and well-maintained, with soft lighting that created a welcoming atmosphere. However, the distance to her door seemed much longer than usual, and each step required conscious effort and determination. Kate's apartment key felt unusually heavy in her trembling hand as she attempted to unlock her door. The simple task that she performed automatically every day suddenly required careful coordination and multiple attempts. William stood patiently beside her, offering assistance without being intrusive, allowing her to maintain her dignity while providing support when needed. The apartment interior reflected Kate's personality and lifestyle, with comfortable furnishings arranged for both functionality and aesthetic appeal. Professional materials and personal touches were thoughtfully integrated throughout the space, creating an environment that was both productive and nurturing. William was impressed by the obvious care and attention that had gone into creating this personal sanctuary. As they entered the apartment, Kate felt a profound sense of relief at finally being in her own space, surrounded by familiar objects and comforting routines. However, the contrast between her usual energetic presence in this environment and her current depleted state was stark and unsettling. She made her way slowly to the living room sofa, grateful for the opportunity to finally sit down in comfort and safety. William helped Kate settle onto the sofa, adjusting cushions to support her properly and ensuring that she was as comfortable as possible. His movements were gentle and considerate, reflecting both his natural courtesy and his growing concern for her well-being. The apartment's warm lighting and peaceful atmosphere provided a welcome contrast to the intense energy of the evening's event. Kate's breathing had become more labored during the journey from the car to her apartment, and William noticed that her color had become increasingly pale. Her hands showed a slight tremor, and she seemed to be having difficulty focusing her eyes. These symptoms, combined with her obvious exhaustion, suggested that her condition was more serious than simple fatigue. William quietly suggested that Kate might benefit from something to drink, offering to prepare tea or water while she rested on the sofa. His practical approach to caregiving reflected his problem-solving nature, focusing on immediate needs while monitoring for signs of deterioration. Kate gratefully accepted his offer, recognizing that she needed hydration and possibly some simple nutrition. The apartment's kitchen was compact but well-organized, with everything necessary for preparing simple meals and beverages. William familiarized himself quickly with the layout, finding glasses, tea supplies, and other essentials with minimal disruption. His efficient movements and respectful approach to her personal space demonstrated both competence and consideration. While William prepared refreshments, Kate attempted to process the events of the evening and her current situation. The gala's tremendous success provided deep satisfaction, but her physical condition was becoming increasingly alarming. She had pushed herself far beyond reasonable limits, and her body was demanding the rest and care that she had been denying it for weeks. Kate's attempts to stand and assist with the beverage preparation were gently but firmly discouraged by William, who insisted that she continue resting while he handled these simple tasks. His authoritative but caring approach was different from her usual pattern of handling every detail herself, and she found his competent assistance both comforting and slightly disorienting. The warm tea that William prepared was exactly what Kate needed, providing both hydration and a sense of normalcy to the increasingly surreal situation. As she sipped the beverage slowly, she felt some of her strength beginning to return, though her overall condition remained concerning. The simple act of being cared for was emotionally moving, as she rarely allowed herself to be in such a vulnerable position. William settled into a nearby chair, maintaining a respectful distance while remaining close enough to provide immediate assistance if needed. His presence was calming and reassuring, offering support without being overwhelming or intrusive. The quiet conversation that developed between them was gentle and undemanding, allowing Kate to participate as her energy permitted. As they talked, Kate found herself sharing more about the personal significance of the evening's event and her connection to the Foundation's mission. The story of her brother's heart surgery and her family's experience with pediatric cardiac care provided context for her passionate dedication to the cause. William listened with genuine interest and empathy, understanding more fully the emotional investment that had driven her extraordinary efforts. William shared some of his own experiences with the hospital project, describing his interactions with young patients and their families during the design process. His observations about the courage and resilience of children facing serious medical challenges resonated deeply with Kate's own experiences and motivations. This exchange of personal stories created a foundation of mutual understanding and respect. The conversation gradually revealed the depth of commitment that both of them brought to their work with the Foundation, albeit in different capacities. William's architectural expertise and Kate's fundraising and administrative skills represented complementary approaches to supporting the organization's mission. The potential for future collaboration was becoming apparent, though Kate's immediate health concerns remained the primary focus. As the evening progressed, Kate's condition showed some improvement with rest and hydration, but William remained concerned about her overall well-being. Her color was slightly better, and her breathing had become more regular, but she still appeared fragile and exhausted. The tremor in her hands had diminished, though it hadn't completely disappeared. William's suggestion that Kate consider seeking medical evaluation was presented carefully, emphasizing his concern rather than alarm. His observations about her symptoms were factual and non-dramatic, but he made clear his belief that professional assessment might be appropriate given the severity of her exhaustion and the stress she had endured. Kate's initial resistance to the idea of medical attention was predictable, given her independent nature and her tendency to minimize her own needs in favor of external responsibilities. However, William's calm persistence and logical arguments began to make an impression, particularly when he pointed out that her health was essential to her continued ability to help others. The conversation about seeking medical care was interrupted when Kate suddenly felt another wave of dizziness, more intense than any she had experienced earlier. This episode was accompanied by nausea and a feeling of profound weakness that made it difficult for her to remain upright on the sofa. William immediately moved closer, providing physical support while assessing her condition with growing alarm. The sudden intensification of Kate's symptoms marked a critical turning point in what had already been a concerning evening. William watched with growing alarm as her face became even paler and beads of perspiration appeared on her forehead despite the comfortable temperature in the apartment. Her breathing became shallow and rapid, and she seemed to be struggling to maintain consciousness as she gripped the arm of the sofa for support. William immediately moved from his chair to sit beside Kate on the sofa, providing physical support while trying to assess the severity of her condition. His limited medical knowledge was sufficient to recognize that this was no longer simple exhaustion, but potentially something requiring immediate professional intervention. The transformation from fatigue to acute distress had occurred rapidly, making the situation increasingly urgent. Kate's attempt to minimize her symptoms and insist that she was fine became increasingly unconvincing as her voice grew weaker and her words less coherent. She tried to stand, perhaps to prove that she was capable of managing independently, but the effort was clearly beyond her current capacity. William gently but firmly encouraged her to remain seated, his calm demeanor masking his growing concern about her deteriorating condition. The conversation about medical attention was no longer theoretical as Kate's symptoms continued to worsen. William's earlier suggestions about seeking professional evaluation had transformed from cautious recommendation to urgent necessity. However, he was careful to present this escalation in terms of practical problem-solving rather than emergency response, hoping to avoid adding panic to an already stressful situation. Kate's resistance to the idea of medical care was becoming weaker as her physical condition deteriorated further. The independent spirit that had driven her professional success was struggling against the undeniable reality of her body's limitations. She found herself unable to mount her usual determined arguments, partly due to her diminished energy and partly due to the increasingly obvious severity of her situation. William's suggestion that they call for emergency medical assistance was initially met with protest from Kate, who continued to insist that rest and hydration would be sufficient to address her condition. However, her arguments lacked conviction, and her physical presentation contradicted her verbal assertions of wellness. The disparity between her claims and her appearance was becoming too significant to ignore. As Kate's symptoms continued to intensify, William made the decision to call emergency services despite her protests. His calm but authoritative approach to the situation reflected his natural leadership abilities and his commitment to ensuring her safety above all other considerations. The call was made efficiently and professionally, with clear communication about Kate's symptoms and condition. While waiting for emergency responders to arrive, William focused on keeping Kate comfortable and conscious. He helped her lie down on the sofa with her feet elevated, covered her with a throw blanket from nearby, and continued to monitor her breathing and responsiveness. His steady presence and competent care provided reassurance during an increasingly frightening experience. Kate's awareness of her surroundings began to fluctuate as her condition worsened. There were moments when she seemed alert and responsive, followed by periods when she appeared disoriented and confused. William maintained constant communication with her, asking simple questions and providing gentle encouragement to help keep her engaged and conscious. The apartment's peaceful atmosphere was disrupted by the arrival of emergency medical technicians, whose professional equipment and urgent demeanor brought the gravity of the situation into sharp focus. Their rapid assessment confirmed William's concerns about Kate's condition, validating his decision to seek immediate medical intervention despite her initial protests. The medical team's evaluation revealed that Kate was suffering from severe dehydration, exhaustion, and what appeared to be symptoms consistent with acute stress response. Her blood pressure was elevated, her heart rate was irregular, and her blood sugar levels were dangerously low. The combination of factors had created a medical emergency that required immediate professional treatment. As the paramedics prepared Kate for transport to the hospital, she experienced a moment of clarity and reached out to grasp William's hand. Her grip was weak but determined, and her eyes conveyed both gratitude and fear. The vulnerability she displayed was a stark contrast to the competent professional who had orchestrated such a successful evening just hours earlier. William assured Kate that he would follow her to the hospital and remain available to help with any arrangements that might be necessary. His commitment to seeing her through this crisis reflected both his growing personal concern for her well-being and his recognition of the significant role she had played in the Foundation's success. The evening that had begun as a professional obligation had evolved into something much more personal and meaningful. The ambulance ride to the hospital was conducted with professional efficiency, with medical personnel monitoring Kate's vital signs and providing supportive care during transport. William followed in his car, maintaining visual contact with the emergency vehicle while mentally preparing for the potential complications that might arise from Kate's condition. At the hospital, Kate was immediately taken to the emergency department for comprehensive evaluation and treatment. The medical team's assessment confirmed the paramedics' initial findings and revealed additional concerns about her overall health status. The weeks of stress and inadequate self-care had taken a more significant toll on her body than anyone had realized. William remained in the hospital's waiting area, serving as Kate's primary contact and advocate since her family lived in another state and hadn't yet been reached. His presence provided continuity and support during a period of medical uncertainty, and his detailed knowledge of the evening's events proved valuable to the treating physicians. The emergency department physician explained that Kate's condition, while serious, was treatable with appropriate medical intervention and lifestyle modifications. The combination of dehydration, exhaustion, and stress had created a perfect storm of symptoms, but none of the underlying issues were permanently damaging. Recovery would require time, rest, and significant changes to her approach to work-life balance. As Kate's condition stabilized with medical treatment, she became more alert and aware of her surroundings. Her first concern was about the Foundation's follow-up activities and the various responsibilities that would need attention in the coming days. Even in her hospital bed, her dedication to her work remained paramount, though her physical limitations made it impossible to address these concerns immediately. William's gentle but firm insistence that Kate focus on her recovery rather than work responsibilities was delivered with both authority and compassion. His perspective as an outside observer allowed him to see more clearly than Kate herself how unsustainable her previous lifestyle had become. The evening's crisis had served as a dramatic wake-up call about the importance of self-care and realistic limitations. The hospital's social worker visited to discuss Kate's support systems and recovery planning. The conversation revealed that Kate had been operating without adequate personal support networks, relying almost entirely on her professional relationships for social interaction and emotional sustenance. This isolation had contributed to her tendency to overwork and neglect her own needs. William's continued presence at the hospital and his obvious concern for Kate's well-being impressed the medical staff and provided Kate with a sense of security that she hadn't experienced in years. His practical approach to problem-solving extended to helping coordinate communication with Kate's employer, family members, and other essential contacts. As the immediate medical crisis passed, and Kate's condition continued to improve, the conversation between her and William turned to more personal topics. The shared experience of the evening's events had created a bond that transcended their previous professional relationship, and both were beginning to recognize the potential for something deeper and more meaningful to develop between them. Kate's reflection on the evening's events was complex, combining pride in the gala's tremendous success with embarrassment about her physical collapse and gratitude for William's unexpected support. The experience had forced her to confront the unsustainable nature of her lifestyle and the importance of accepting help from others when needed. William's perspective on the evening focused on his admiration for Kate's dedication and competence, coupled with concern about the personal cost of her professional commitments. His observations about the need for balance and sustainability in demanding careers reflected his own experiences with the pressures of professional success and the importance of maintaining personal well-being. The conversation about future plans was tentative but hopeful, with both Kate and William expressing interest in continuing their connection beyond the circumstances that had brought them together. The Foundation's work would provide ongoing opportunities for collaboration, but their personal relationship had the potential to develop independently of professional considerations. As the hospital prepared to discharge Kate with instructions for rest and follow-up care, William's offer to provide transportation and initial support was gratefully accepted. The practical arrangements for her recovery would require assistance that her usual support systems couldn't provide, and William's willingness to help filled a crucial gap in her care network. The drive back to Kate's apartment was conducted in a much different atmosphere than their earlier journey. Kate was feeling physically better thanks to medical treatment, but the emotional impact of the evening's events was still being processed. The combination of professional triumph and personal crisis had created a complex mix of feelings that would require time to fully understand. Back in her apartment, Kate settled onto the sofa where the evening's crisis had begun, but now with a fundamentally changed perspective on her life and priorities. The medical emergency had served as a dramatic reminder of the importance of balance and self-care, lessons that she was determined to integrate into her future approach to both work and personal relationships. William's presence in her apartment no longer felt like that of a helpful stranger, but rather as someone who had become genuinely important to her well-being. The evening's events had accelerated the development of their relationship in ways that might have taken months to achieve under normal circumstances. The foundation they had laid during the crisis provided a strong basis for whatever might develop between them in the future. As they reflected on the evening's events, both Kate and William recognized that the gala's success would be remembered not just for its fundraising achievements, but also for the personal connections and insights it had generated. The crisis that had seemed so frightening in the moment had ultimately led to important realizations about priorities, relationships, and the importance of accepting support from others. The evening that had begun with such professional focus and achievement had concluded with profound personal growth and the beginning of a relationship that held the potential to enrich both of their lives significantly. Kate's collapse had been frightening, but William's quick response and steady support had transformed a medical emergency into an opportunity for deeper connection and mutual understanding. Looking toward the future, both Kate and William understood that the lessons learned during this challenging evening would influence their approach to work, relationships, and personal care for years to come. The experience had demonstrated the importance of recognizing limitations, accepting help, and prioritizing human connections alongside professional achievements. The gala's success would provide lasting benefits for the Foundation's mission, but the personal growth and relationship development that had emerged from the evening's crisis might prove to be even more valuable in the long term.